What's up, everybody? I'm David Hain. Welcome to episode 244 of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. And yes, this is our second Wacky Wednesday episode for today. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the link with your friends. If you'd like to get our curriculum, you can get the paperback or ebook of From Ashes to Destiny on Amazon. Today's episode is number 244 of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast, and it's entitled Scared, Blase, or Losing the Fight. And again, this is going to be covering Chapter 5 from Phase 2 of the curriculum From Ashes to Destiny. The chapter is entitled The Heart of Addicts Worldwide. And in today's episode, I'm just going to go over snippets from 3 of the stories in this chapter. And in this chapter, we look at different aspects of addiction in a handful of countries around the world, just to really see addiction is addiction all around the world. Okay? Cool. The first snippet I'm going to read is about someone that I call Francois, and he's a gentleman that I met in South Africa. Actually, my first trip to South Africa, he was the driver when I got off the airplane. And I'm just going to read a part of the story, and it goes like this. 3 days passed until Francois felt safe enough to share about his addiction with me. I can tell the way you look at me that you know, he said. How many bags do you do a day? I asked. How do you know it was heroin? Francois asked sheepishly. Heroin and addiction look the same all around the world, I replied. I've been praying, and I believe God sent you here to help me get free of this addiction, Francois continued. I've tried to stop so many times. I'm down to 1 or 2 bags a day, but I just can't stop. As we discussed his history of usage, Francois begged, please don't tell the head of my mission group. I know I'd be back using 10 or more bags a day if they kicked me out. I can't handle one more rejection. The second snippet I'd like to read is from the section in this chapter about Russia and their alcohol poisoning problem and resultant HIV with the alcohol use in Russia. And this snippet says, in Irkutsk, which has Russia's highest HIV infection rate, it shows Yulia Rakina, its boss, maintains that attitudes, not cash, are the main obstacle. Young people do not use condoms, she says. Even HIV-positive people are blasé. It's hard to explain to someone who feels well that they're going to die. The third snippet, and it's a short one, is from the section of the chapter on Afghanistan and their situation with the heroin addiction around the world, with the opium being grown there. And it says, a veteran Afghan Interior Ministry official said, we are losing the fight against drug traffickers. If we don't crack down on these guys soon, it won't be long until they're in control of everything. Okay, 3 different aspects, 3 different short snippets, and I think there's about a half dozen or so stories in the chapter. So let's see what we can discuss about the 3 that I read. First discussion topic. It took Francois 3 days before he felt safe to talk to me. And remember, he feared he would get kicked out of the mission group if I told, and then he would return to 10 plus bags of heroin a day. What do you look for to determine if someone is safe to talk to about your addiction? What fears do you deal with that keep you from even looking to find someone safe? Second question about Francois. he tried many times to stop, but just couldn't completely quit. What are some things that keep addicts dipping and dabbing once or twice a day, that they don't completely quit? What keeps you or kept you in that aspect where you could cut down, but you couldn't quit? And speaking of cutting down, the third question for discussion, Francois joined a missionary organization because he knew he would use less heroin around them. What have you tried to be able to cut down on your use? Have you hung out at religious-based shelters, or did you go to a faith-based treatment center? Or do you try to stay with family members and know that you will use less? Or do you try to hold on to your job and just use before work and after your work? Do you try to stay involved with your kids and your family's life because you know that you can't show up high if you're going to your child's ball game or what have you? So I want you to be able to really open up here and answer that from your experience. What have you tried to be able to cut down on your use? How did that work out for you? How long were you able to stay, as Francois was, at 1 or 2 bags a day? And what happened that made it all blow up in your face and you were back on your next run? From the Russia story. Remember, Russia blamed a blasé attitude of youth for its growing HIV and alcohol poisoning problems. And I'd like you to describe your own I could care less feelings about addiction, or maybe the communities or your family or your society's blasé attitude towards addiction. And so blasé isn't really, rationalizing or minimizing. It's just sort of saying, hey, I could care less. It's really just sort of saying, I'm using what's it to you. I'm good with me. And it can be even from non-users saying, oh yeah, he uses, but he's got it under control. We just let him do his own thing. And I want to key in on the youth aspect, because I've heard many, many times from younger addicts in their late teens or in their 20s saying, you guys had your fun partying time. You guys had your wild time in addiction and began to start to come right in your late 30s. So, hey, let me have my fun. So the blasé attitude can take a lot of different aspects, and I think it's important to be able to talk about what aspect of addiction are you blasé about. Is it using in general? Is it about crime that comes with addiction? Is it about the risk of disease or overdose or prison? Is it the homelessness? Is it the living on the streets? Is it the poor diet, that your health, whatever? What are you blasé? What aspect of addiction have you reached the point that you say, I could care less. It just comes along with addiction. And finally, a fifth discussion point from the Afghanistan one. Again, Afghanistan said they were losing the battle against drug traffickers. How would you describe your country's government efforts against illegal drugs? And what do you think the best approach is for governments in regard to the drugs in your country? I'd like to really open that up for any of you to give me feedback of what's working in your country on legalization of drugs and decriminalization of drugs, or getting tougher on drugs and arresting drug traffickers and drug mules. Whatever you think, I'd love to hear your comments. Thanks for listening to this episode of the A to D From Addict to Disciple podcast. So again, I'd love your comments. You can message me on the link in this podcast or by email at davidfroma2d@gmail.com, or you can go on my website, www.froma2d.org, and click on the contact page. Thanks for listening. Keep on listening to future podcasts, and as always, stay safe and stay resilient.